Well, have you ever had an assignment that you felt like God had given you, but then you ran away from it? You got scared, you got nervous, you got intimidated, or maybe you just didn't want to do it, and so you ended up running the other direction. That's what we're going to talk about over the next couple of weeks as we talk about the story of Jonah. I got to tell you this quick story, though, before we jump in. I was at the car wash last week. In Atlanta, we had a sunny day. It had been raining a lot. My wife had been asking me, hey, would you go clean out the minivan? Anybody got a minivan? Anybody got kids that ride in that minivan? Well, then you have a dirty minivan, right? Because these children, unbelievable. I don't know how your kids eat. My kids eat like beavers. When they eat something, like food's just flying out everywhere. I jokingly say, hey, instead of just taking the Cheez-Its and crumbling up and sprinkling them all over the car, why don't you try putting them in your mouth? Because it feels like that's what you're doing, right? Sarcasm's not a great tool with children, but I can't resist sometimes. So honestly, if they had a machine that you could take the van and hook it up to the machine and they would just turn it upside down and just shake it out, that's how I feel like our van needs to be clean. But we had this one sunny day last Saturday, and I thought, all right, it's been raining a lot, sunny day. I'm going to go honor my wife, serve my wife, love my wife well. And so I put all the kids in the car. I'm like, y'all made the mess. You're going to help me clean the mess up. Let's go to the car wash. Now, we got one of those car washes around the corner from us that I know y'all got these car washes here. It's one of those rich car washes, you know? We didn't have these car washes when we were growing up. Now they got these car washes where you can go clean the outside of your car, and then they give you access, as a part of the deal, they give you access to all their vacuums and the blowers and the sprays and all the washcloths and stuff. It's really a nice situation. And I wasn't the only one who had this idea this day. Evidently, everyone else in our community had thought about going to the car wash as well because it was very crowded. And so I'd waited in line. I'd gone through and done the exterior, and I was swung back around, and I'm waiting on one of the spots to open up at one of the vacuum stations. They were all full. And as this lady starts backing out her car, me being next in line is thinking, oh, here we go. This is great. I'm going to get her spot. And as she's backing out, this car swoops in from off the road, didn't even use the car wash, swooped in and got into the spot with the vacuums right there. I was so indignant. I was so angry. I was so mad because, first of all, I thought, you are stealing from this car wash owner. You, my friend, you're what's wrong with America. I mean, I was so mad. And so I tell our kids that everybody duck, get down, hide your eyes. I rolled down my window and I said, I'm about to confront this person about the error in his ways. So I rolled the window down and I said, excuse me, sir. Because even in my anger, I'm still courteous and polite. I said, I was next in line and you took my spot. That was my line. I didn't have a big creative meeting. I didn't write it out. I just what came to the top of my head. This gentleman got out of his car, and it took him a while to get out of his car because a man that size doesn't do anything quickly. This was the largest human that I had ever seen. I was like, it's like Andre the Giant and The Rock, like somehow had a baby and all of a sudden it's you. And I'm like, whoa, this person is gigantic. And so as soon as I saw how large this man was and that he was walking toward the car, I slowly rolled the window up and goes, you're good, you can take your time. And then I sunk down into my seat, and my kids made so much fun of me all day long, telling me all about how I talked a big game. I was about to confront this guy. You acted so big and bold. And then as soon as he walked over and wanted some, you got real nervous and scared. I was running in the other direction. Listen, here's what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to talk about confronting people who are stealing from car washes. But we are going to talk about every one of us has an area of our life where God has given us an assignment. God has said, hey, I've got something I want you to do. Maybe it's the way he has encouraged you and asked you to treat your spouse. Maybe it's the way he's asked you to raise the children that you have. Maybe it's the way he's asked you to handle your finances. Maybe it's the way he's asked you to conduct your business. The way he's asked you to handle your taxes. Maybe it's the way he's asked you to handle your dating relationships. Maybe it's the way he's asked you to handle your sexuality. All of us, in some way or another, are running The message of Jonah, I mean, there's a lot of different places we're going to go, a lot of different things we can talk about, but every one of us at some level or another are running in an area of our life. The question today is not who's running. The question is, where are you running? What are you running from? All of us are runners. Every one of us, whether you're a Jesus follower or not, every one of us have some kind of hypocrisy in us. This is the way we think we ought to live. This is the way we say that people ought to behave. This is the way we say people ought to treat others. This is the way we say people ought to handle their businesses, handle their affairs, handle their conduct. And we say, you know what? We're going to go in another direction. There is no such thing as being stagnant in life. We are either moving toward what we're supposed to be doing or running away from where we're supposed to go. Every single one of us have some amount of hypocrisy in us. If you came with somebody today, just give them a little elbow and just whisper it under your breath. Say it out loud if you want to. You're a hypocrite. Go ahead, tell them. Now, let me also say this. We got to also keep it real. You got to also tell them, hey, I'm a hypocrite too. Right? Because every one of us are. I'm not saying we want to be. I'm just saying today the message is not just for a select few that are running. No, today the message is for every one of us. Every one of us are running in some area of our life. You know what God has asked you to do. You know what God has called you to. You know how God has asked you to live, and you're just not doing it. You're running from it. The reason why I felt like we had to start there is because it's the place we begin to find God's mercy and His grace. It's the place we begin to find God's forgiveness, is we all have to admit that we're running. And the good news is, as soon as you're willing to admit that you're running, that's the moment that we begin to experience help from God. The moment we admit, okay, I'm running. It's in that moment that we begin to experience help from God. This is the story of Jonah. If you have a Bible, I would love to invite you to turn there. If you have technology, if you use the Bible app on your phone, I would love to invite you to open it up. We're going to put the text of Jonah 1, we're going to put it on the screen, but we're just going to handle Jonah chapter 1 today. The rest of the series, we'll handle Jonah 2, Jonah 3, and Jonah 4. It's too big of a story for us to try to digest it all in one sitting. And so today, we're going to try to tackle Jonah 1. The way the story begins in Jonah 1 verse 1, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. God said to him, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. I'm telling you, there's so many different points and subpoints and comments that we could make about this. Honestly, one of the things we're going to learn about this story over the next couple of weeks is Jonah had to come to terms with his own racism. There was this people group that Jonah despised. Now, we don't know why he despised them. We don't know if he despised them because of the color of their skin, because of the way they lived, because of the history, because of where they were from, because of things that had happened in the past. But we just know he didn't even know them. But just because they were in Nineveh, he didn't like them. He didn't feel like they were worthy of God's grace, that they were worthy of God's forgiveness, worthy of God's kindness. And so he didn't want to go do what God had asked him to do. And so what did he do? He ran. He ran in the other direction. He knew what God had called him to. He knew what God had asked of him, but he said, no, hard pass. I don't want to be a part of that. I'm going in the other direction. One of the things we're going to talk about in this series is that, yes, we can run from God, but we cannot outrun God. You know, it's kind of silly to think that he did what he did, because it's almost as if he's going, I'm going to run away from what God is asking me to do, thinking I can get away from him. You can run from him, but you cannot outrun him. There is no place that you can go to get away from God's presence. There is no place where you can go to get away from God's direction and power and benevolence and goodness and grace. You can't outrun him. And it's not like he's the bad boogeyman that's going to come and find you no matter where you are. He's not like Liam Neeson from Taken, right? I have a particular set of skills that make me a nightmare for someone like you. No, he's not like that. But he is a good, gracious, kind, omnipotent, all-powerful God. There is not a square inch of the universe that God does not rule. You cannot outrun him. There's nowhere ultimately that you can go. So running from God, in a sense, is a futile enterprise. But Jonah, just like us, he's not thinking about all that. No, he's just going, I know what God's called me to do. I know what God's asking me to do. I don't want to do it. So I'm running the other direction. Now, this is a story about Jonah, but this is our story. I don't know what you're running from. And maybe you don't even know what you're running from as well. My hope just in this first week is that maybe God would bring it to your attention. You may as well be aware of it. You may as well identify it. You may as well recognize, okay, there it is. That's the thing that I'm running from. Because until we're willing to recognize it, until we're willing to identify it, we can't experience the help from God. Jonah was running, and so are we. And we can run from God, but we cannot outrun God. Look at where Jonah ran. This is, honestly, it's kind of humorous. It's kind of comical where Jonah ran. Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, which sounds like a city on Star Wars or something, right? He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Now look, we could do a lot if we were to just pull up a map and look at where he was and where Nineveh was, and then look at where Tarshish was. In relation to where he was, in relation to where Nineveh was, which direction was Tarshish? Anybody want to guess? It's the complete opposite direction, right? You don't even need a map. You don't even need a seminary degree to understand that. You don't have to have a Rand McNally. You don't have to be a cartographer to understand that. You know it already. Some of you have heard a sermon on Jonah before, but you can just kind of guess. You're like, I get it. He didn't want to go where God was wanting him to go. So he went the opposite direction. But let me tell you what's even more interesting than that, in my opinion. At the time that God asked him to do this, he was probably about 500 miles from Nineveh. Do you know how far Tarshish was from him? 2,500 miles. He didn't just go in the opposite direction. He went a long way in the opposite direction. And here's what we got to understand. When we're reading Jonah, Jonah's not live tweeting. He's not live streaming. He's not just telling everybody in the moment, this is what's going on. Yeah, God's asked me to do it, and I don't really want to do it, so I'm going to go the other direction. No, it's a book of reflection. It's a story where the author's looking back over what had happened, and I wonder even then if we could add some commentary. If Jonah would have told us, if he would have said, you know what, truthfully, listen, I mean, don't tell anybody I said this, but I was only 500 miles from Nineveh. It would have actually been a lot easier to just obey God. Anybody want to testify to that your own disobedience got you in a situation that you begged God to get you out of? Is it just me? Am I the only one? Where my own disobedience caused me to run in the opposite. It was harder to disobey him than it was to obey him. If I would have just obeyed him, I wouldn't have gotten in all the trouble that I ended up in. And some of you can relate to this. In your finances, you go, oh, it's not that I didn't know. No, I knew if I were to just save, if I were to just be steady, if I wouldn't have leased the boat, then I wouldn't have gotten into all the trouble. But it was me going in the opposite direction. And it actually caused more trouble than if I would have just obeyed God. I hate that. But one of the powerful benefits of obeying God is that you avoid the consequences of sin. I know that seems simple, but one of the most amazing benefits of following God and obeying His way, trusting that He has your best interest in mind, trusting that He's leading you in the best direction, one of the most powerful outcomes of obeying Him is that we avoid the pain of disobedience. And sometimes people, we trick ourselves because, notice here, look at what he says, that there was a boat. He found this boat in Tarshish, right? He's like, I'm going to go in the other direction. And he's going, I'm running away from God. I don't care. I don't want to go to Nineveh. And so I'm going down to Tarshish. He gets to Tarshish, and then what happens? There's a boat that's there. And what does he have to do to get on the boat? He has to pay a fare, which we could spend a whole day on that, right? That when you disobey God, it's going to cost you. You're going to have to pay. But he didn't care. He did. He looked through his wallet, he grabbed his money clip and goes, I don't care, how much does it cost? I'm in. Pays for it. The other thing we got to watch out for is oftentimes when we're wanting to go the other direction and run from God, we find vehicles and cargo ships and trains and rental cars and people that will help us disobey God. And we sometimes see that as, well, look, how could I have resisted? There was a boat that was going there. I had to get on it. What was I supposed to do? Was I looking for trouble? Yeah, but it just so happened that she was right there. He was right there. We were already dating. The deal was too easy. It was too good to be true. I couldn't not. Now, see, here's what we got to watch out for. Somebody said, better watch out. If you want to run from God, there will always be a ship to take you. If you want to run away from God, don't think that because there's a ship, I got to do it. I got to take it. It's here for a reason. I couldn't not. No. You got to remember that if you're looking to run from God, there will always be a way for you to do it. There will always be somebody that's going to participate. If you're trying to lose weight, there's going to always be a meal that's going to allow you to break your diet. If you're trying to work out more and exercise more, you will always find a helpful excuse as to why you can't do it. If you're trying to budget, there will always be a way for you to spend your money and break your budget. If you're trying to run from God, there will always be a ship ready to take you there. And you just got to know that. You got to know it going in so you don't trick yourself, rationalize to yourself. Well, I guess I'll just call it a cheat day. I've never liked leg day anyway. He was pretty good looking. He said he had a lot of money. What was I supposed to do? No. If you want to run from God, I'm telling you, there will always be a ship that will take you there. And then look at what happens next, right? He gets on this boat. He boards the ship. Verse 4, and the Lord sent, now this is dangerous, because I'm not trying to tell you that every time there's a disruption, there's an obstacle, there's a challenge in your life that God has sent it. Sometimes God allows it. But in this case, we cannot deny what it says. That inspired by the Holy Spirit, the author writes, the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break. But as I was thinking about this and processing this, I was trying to think all right, if I'm Jonah, first of all, Jonah wasn't thinking a bit about the storm. We're going to find out in a second, but what was Jonah doing during the storm? Somebody better say it, right? He's down in the bottom of the boat taking a nap. He's like, I don't care. I don't care what happens. Because when you're running from God, you're not worried about all the details, right? It's not like he's going like, I got to get this just right. I got to nail the landing on this one. He's going, no, I don't care. I'm already running away from God, like whatever, you know? But what would he think about the storm, though? A lot of times we think, oh my goodness, this storm, how could it be, right? You lost your job. The person broke up with you. Your dream that you had for the business that didn't work out. The marriage ended. You got sick. A storm arose in your life. The bank wouldn't do the deal. The business partner backed out. The storm arose in our life, and a lot of times we curse the storm when the truth is, sometimes the storm is God's provision. Sometimes the storm is God protecting us. Sometimes the storm is God can see over the horizon. You can't. And God's going, I know where this is going. I know where this is headed. It's taking you a direction where you don't want to be. You think it's where you want to be, but you can't see it play out. You can't see the ending, but I can. And so I'm going to sometimes send a storm in your life that is actually the provision of God. It's actually a life vest. It's actually a lifeboat. It's actually God saying, you have no idea how good this is. Garth Brooks in the 90s. Remember that song for those of you country music fans? What did he say? Sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers. He thought he bumps into this old girlfriend that he was madly in love with, that he prayed for. God, would you let me marry her? And it didn't work out. And in that moment, he's reminded, oh my goodness, the breakup. I thought I was devastated. I couldn't believe it. And now I realized that the unanswered prayer was actually the provision of God. That God was providing for me and I didn't even recognize it. But see, we don't like it because it doesn't fit what we want. I mean, honestly, if I'm writing the story, I'm going, okay, God sent a great wind, he sent a great storm, and a cruise ship came by and I had to get on board. That'd be kind of nice, wouldn't it? One of those oligarchs from Russia swung by on their yacht and I had to get on board. No. What swung by that he had to get on board? A very large fish. I would have been like, God, this is not the way I would have drawn this story up. And God's going, no. See, here's what you got to remember is that God's provision doesn't always fit our preference. God is providing. Just because it's not the way you want it, just because God's not the Burger King, he's the King of Kings, that he's not doing it the way you prefer, he's not doing it the way you would ask for, he's not giving it to you in the time that you would want it, doesn't mean that it's not from him, and doesn't mean it's not exactly what you need, but sometimes his provision, it doesn't fit our preferences, but don't miss the fact that God is providing. And what God's ultimately trying to do, and what God was ultimately trying to do for Jonah, is he's trying to help Jonah get back under his authority. Jonah, you got to get back in my house. Get back under my umbrella, of protection, right? You got to get back under the umbrella of God. You got to get back under the authority of God. You've got to get back under the provision and protection of the Almighty. You're running out on your own. That's not where you're supposed to be. Be careful, Jonah. Watch out, Jonah. You think you're in trouble, Jonah. You have no idea how dangerous it is out there. This is the younger brother in the prodigal son, right? The younger brother in the prodigal son, why did he leave? You remember the dad tells him later on, he said, buddy, in my house, he tells this to the older brother, he says, buddy, remember, in my house, you've got everything you could ever want. Why would you go anywhere else? Because, I don't know, it looked fun. Because I thought I'd be all right. I thought I could handle the consequences. I thought I'd be able to handle it. It looked enticing. I wanted my independence. I wanted to go where I wanted to go. But what we miss, what we forget, what we often overlook, what Jonah had to clearly be reminded of, what I hope that we will be reminded of today is that living under the authority of God, it's the safest place for us to be. Living under God's authority is the safest place where we can be. So what does it mean to live under the authority of God? It means that we're doing everything we can to honor him, doing everything we can to obey him, doing everything we can to follow him. Jonah was out running on his own, trying to do his own thing. And he's on this boat, the storm comes up. These sailors, they don't know what to do. Jonah's sleeping great. But the sailors are like, this is, what's happened? Something's changed here. There's a variable that is now in the atmosphere, and we can't figure it out. So verse 5 tells us all the sailors, I'm going to fly through the next few verses just to get to the end, but all the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. They're all looking for their own help, right? And they threw the cargo into the ship to try to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below the deck where he laid down and he fell into a deep sleep. And the captain goes to him, wakes him up and says, how can you be asleep right now? Get up and call on your God. We're all trying to do the same thing. Maybe your God will take notice of us and will recognize this calamity, and maybe we won't perish. And the sailors said to each other, come, let us cast lots to find out who's responsible for this mess. And so they cast the lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. They asked him, they said, well, tell us who's responsible for making this trouble for us. What kind of work do you do, by the way? And where do you come from, by the way? What's your country? From what people are you? And he answered, well, I'm a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. If there's a storm, he's the one that can calm it. And Jonah had already told them, he'd already told on himself. They say, what have you done? They knew that he was already running from the Lord because he had already told them, and the sea was getting rougher and rougher. And so they asked him, they said, well, fella, what do you think we ought to do about this to make the sea calm down for us? And I love that Jonah just tells on himself. Look at what he says. He says, you know what you ought to do is just pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied, and it will become calm. He says, I know that it's my fault that this great storm has come upon you. And so they took Jonah 1, 2, 3, and threw him out into the sea that was raging, and the sea immediately calmed. And here's what's remarkable. Don't miss this. Again, we don't have time to camp out on this, but I just feel like somebody needs to know this. And this is also just an encouragement to how powerful God's grace is. But look at what happens. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and they made vows to him. Even in the middle of Jonah's disobedience, God was using him. See, don't think that, oh, well, look at all the good that God is doing, so everything must be cool. No, Jonah, you're still running from God, but God is so gracious and so kind that God can take someone who's running in the opposite direction and still use them. I say that as an encouragement, hopefully to all of us, because we all have areas of our life where we're running from him. And I just need you to know that while David was having an affair with Bathsheba, God wrote amazing music through him that the church still sings. It doesn't make the affair right. He still caused all kind of pain on the people around him. This doesn't make Jonah's life better. He still should have immediately turned around and ran back to God. But even in the middle of our running, God still uses us. It's remarkable that he does it. God uses sinners. He's in the business of using sinners, and he uses even the disobedience of Jonah to bring people to himself. But don't use that to rationalize the running. Don't use it to rationalize the affair or the abuse or the stealing. No. God's going to use it no matter what. But for you and for me, we got to recognize that there's just no good in running. We can't outrun him. We're eventually going to get tired. We're eventually going to run out. We're eventually going to get ourselves in trouble. Worse, maybe. The people around us are going to be the ones affected most by the fact that we're running in the other direction. I remember, this is another side point. I'm telling you, there's so many different places we could go with this, but I remember being at this summer camp when I was a high schooler, and this preacher came to our summer camp, was talking about Jonah. And I'm like, oh, Jonah, I got it. I was like a proud Christian. I was like, hey, he's going to talk about running from God. And he spun this story in a way that I had never really heard it before. He was like, some of you, you're on a boat right now, and your boat is rocky. And the reason why it's rocky is because you got a Jonah on your boat, and you need to throw your Jonah off the boat. I was like, okay. He looks at all the girls in the room. He goes, some of you are dating Jonah, and you need to break up with him. I was like, hello. And so I give you the 2023 version that I was thinking about for today. Some of you got Jonah in your phone, and you need to delete him. You need to delete her. In fact, some of you, the invitation might be, I don't need to walk down front. I need to open up my phone, and I need to start swiping and hit that red button, delete, 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 because maybe you've got somebody on board that is causing you pain because they're running from God. You know that those who walk with the wise grow wise, but a companion of fools suffer harm. Don't suffer harm because you got Jonah on your boat. Get Jonah off your boat. Get him out your phone. And some of you were like, I don't have a Jonah on my phone. Well, watch out. You might just be the Jonah, all right? So that's for the rest of us. Look, here's a preview of next week. We can't give it all away, but you know this part of the story, right? Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. We'll jump into week 2 next week. But to conclude today, I want to just ask you 3 questions, all right? And I don't have any business to ask you these. You don't have to answer these questions. But what I want to do is I want to try to get under the running. I want to try to find the reason. What is the reason why you're running? I have found people run, they run for really 3 different reasons. They run because of the way they see God. They run because of the way they think God sees them. And they run because of the way they see other people. So can I just ask you that? Would you be willing to just take a moment, quiet your soul, quiet your mind, and ask this question? How do you see God? How do you see him? Do you see him as a referee? A strict disciplinarian who's keeping score, counting all the bad that you've done, stacking up all the good that you've done, seeing if they measure out? Do you see him as this old grandpa who's lost his keys, can't find his glasses, has no power? He's sitting around going like, oh, the world's kind of a mess. I don't know what to do. I've kind of lost control. Or do you see him as an almighty God who says, you can call me Father. I love you. I care for you. I believe in you. I've got good in front of you. And I want you to follow me because my way is the best way. How do you see him? Jesus comes along and says, if you want to know what God's like, you can look at me. He says, I and the Father, we're one. And what was he like? Well, he loved people that were far away from him. He loved people that were nothing like him. And he offered everyone the chance. He offered everyone the opportunity to come to him because he paid the ultimate price. He laid down his life. So let me ask you another question. How do you think God sees you? Sometimes we run because we think too highly of ourselves or too lowly of ourselves. The best way to think about ourselves is to think rightly about ourselves. The best way to think about ourselves is to think about ourselves the way God thinks about ourselves. But let me ask you, how do you think about you? How do you think God thinks about you? Is God annoyed at you? Does God think you're worthless? Does God think you're trash? Does God think you're damaged goods? Is God tired of you? Is he exhausted by you? How does he think about you? Is he like, oh, you again? Oh my goodness, you got to be kidding me. Or does he see you as a son? Does he see you as a daughter? Does he see you as a chosen child of the Almighty King? A chosen son, a chosen daughter, who just says, I just want you to be with me because that's the best place you can be. And we'll get into this question more into this series, but how do you see others? This was Jonah's problem. You know this, right? Jonah's problem was he didn't see other people the way God saw other people. Jonah saw these people and felt like they're worthless. They're in the way. They're trash. They're not worthy of God's love. They're not worthy of God's kindness. And God's going, Jonah, you're not seeing other people the way I see other people. How did God see other people? Well, let's look at how Jesus saw other people. Jesus saw other people as valuable, as worthy, and he treated them even more valuable than himself. They weren't, but he treated them as such. How do I know that? Well, because he laid his life down for other people. The only reason why you would lay your life down, sacrifice your life, he gave himself up on a cross because he loved them so much and he treated them as even more valuable than himself. I'm telling you, this is so important because when you see God for who he is, when you see yourself how he sees you, when you see others the way he sees others, it's when you and I can start hiding ourselves in God and not hiding ourselves from God. Jonah, it was like he was running away from God, trying to hide from God. Like he's playing a big game of hide and go seek, like God didn't know where he was. Like God wouldn't be able to find him. Like God didn't create Joppa or create the boat or create the world or create the universe. God's going, Jonah, I know where you are. You cannot hide from me. And newsflash for somebody today, you can't hide from God. But the good news is you don't have to. You don't have to hide from him. No, there's a much better option. Look at Psalm 32. Psalm 32, verse 7 says, you are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. If you're running from God, my hope today is that you'd quit running. If you're trying to hide from God, my hope is that you'd realize you can't. You can run from him, but you can't outrun him, and you certainly can't hide from him, but the good news is you don't have to. You can actually hide yourself in him. He's the safest. Yeah, he's big and he's powerful, but he's safe. And so why would you wait another day? Why not turn around today? Why not identify where is the area of my life where I'm running? Why don't you turn around today and say, I'm going to run to him? Okay, your finances are a mess. That's okay. He's safe. He's not over here judging you. He's over here going, hey, I want to help you. You're in a dating relationship where things aren't in good shape. Your marriage is not in good shape. You feel like your life is not in good shape. He's going, hey, that's okay. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to love you. I'm the safest place that you can hide. Come hide yourself in me, he says.